let's explore one of the most adorable things on planet Earth ever. You guessed it, it's time to talk about dinosaur babies. In this lesson, we'll cover all things related to dinosaur eggs and whether they cared for their young. Later on, I'll highlight the sauropod work that I've done in Madagascar and tell you a really fun detective story that highlights what the earliest months of life were like for soon-to-be giant dinosaurs. To begin, dinosaurs and all terrestrial vertebrates, which are not amphibians, belong to a group of animals that we call amniotes. Amniotes lay shelled eggs that can allow them to reproduce away from the water. We are also considered amniotes, even though our babies are live-born. We've just changed up the traditional amniote egg form a little bit in our mammalian lineage. You may have heard at some point that some dinosaurs were more like us and gave live birth, but we can bust that myth right up front. All dinosaurs laid eggs, just like almost every other amniote. Amniote eggs have different shell types. Sometimes they can be kind of soft and less mineralized, like the eggs of a sea turtle. Lizards and crocodiles lay leathery eggs that are a bit more flexible. Birds lay hard, crunchy shelled eggs, as you may know from your own experiences cracking eggs while you're cooking. And ancient dinosaurs laid their own hard-shelled eggs. To dig into the questions of dinosaur eggs, nests, and babies, we'll begin by considering what we know about reproductive biology in their extant phylogenetic bracketing taxa, crocodiles and birds. From there, we'll dig into the preserved fossil record of dinosaur reproduction. The archosaurs living today give us the best hints at what might have been going on in the world of dinosaurs. Most of us probably don't know much about the story of crocodile reproduction. I mean, really, why would we? So let's fill in some information now. We'll begin in the oviducts, where eggs are built. Crocodiles have two functional oviducts where they shell their eggs. Since all the eggs are formed at once, they take the shape of equidimensional ovals without a skinny and fat end. When they're ready to deposit these eggs, they scoop out a sandy hollow for a nest and lay all of them in rapid succession. Despite their cold-blooded exterior attitudes, crocodiles are actually great parents. They guard their nests during the entire incubation period after they laid their eggs, and they are diligent caretakers, mounding up vegetation on top of their nests to help incubate and protect their eggs. The rotting vegetation creates a little warm microclimate for the eggs to develop. Temperatures within the mound are variable, and mom crocs will manipulate the positions of the eggs using their teeth. They do this because sex is temperature dependent in crocodiles. So by shifting the position of eggs within the mound's different temperature zones, the parent is ensuring a 50-50 male to female ratio of her offspring. Hatching occurs in a narrow little window of time en masse, with croc babies still in the nest squeaking in communication with those who already made it outside. For anywhere from 6 to 9 months, the baby crocodiles hang out close to the parent. In fact, when the initial move from nest to water occurs, the parent helps the babies by scooping them up with their jaws and gently carrying them. This looks terrifying when you consider the strong bite force of the adult croc, but they gently lift the fragile babies out of the nest without incident. What about birds? Birds typically have one functional oviduct and shell their eggs one at a time, conveyor belt style. This imparts a slightly irregular shape to the egg with one skinnier end and one fatter end, and they lay their eggs one by one. Birds have a wide variety of nesting and parental care techniques. There's no one-size-fits-all. Some birds, like ostriches, lay their eggs in an open ground nest. Ostriches are pretty big and don't usually sit atop their nests, but instead lay down beside them to allow the radiating heat from their bodies to warm the eggs. In contrast, other birds sit on top of their eggs to keep them warm. Once baby birds hatch, they exhibit two options for post-hatching behavior. The first is precocity. This means that baby birds are pretty self-sufficient once they hatch. They can walk around on their own legs and eat by themselves rather than having to wait for a parent to bring them food. Baby ostriches, emus, and chicks are a great example of precocial birds. Most of the other birds you're likely to encounter exhibit the other option for post-hatching strategy. They're altricial and require a ton of parental care after hatching. Their limbs exhibit large cartilage caps that make them too soft to walk on right away. So these birds are nest-bound and completely dependent on their parents to deliver food back to the nest. Baby robins and sparrows are great examples of birds with an altricial style of post-hatching behavior. Eggs are remarkable little independent oceans that allow amniotes to move away from laying squishy eggs in watery environments. In a way, it's like the animals that lay shelled amniote eggs take their water world with them. You might think that since dinosaurs included some of the biggest animals ever to walk on land, they might have laid the biggest eggs on Earth. That's not actually true. Well, not quite true. If we count birds as dinosaurs, it's still true that a dinosaur laid the biggest egg, but it isn't a Mesozoic dinosaur. Instead, the biggest egg award goes to a much more recently extinct dinosaur, actually a bird, the elephant bird, otherwise known as Aepyornis, that went extinct on the island of Madagascar when humans arrived there around 30,000 years ago. These eggs were so big that when we do find random fragments of them lying around on the ground, we often get super excited thinking that we've just identified a dinosaur egg. And we have, just not the kind of dinosaur that we're looking for. Modern-day dinos also lay the smallest known amniote eggs. Those of hummingbirds are about the size of a jelly bean. It may surprise you, but Mesozoic dinosaurs mostly had pretty small eggs. Even the biggest dinosaur eggs are no bigger than a soccer ball. Most dinosaurs, including the biggest of all time, the sauropods, laid eggs about the size of a softball or a large grapefruit. Another fun fact about eggs, they can be really colorful. Though most eggs that we encounter day to day are simply white, especially those that are buried or brooded under a parent until they hatch, others can be a wide range of colors. All egg coloration is the result of just two major pigments in different combinations. One of these is a pigment that results in blue-green hues, like we see in robin or emu eggs. The other pigment imparts brownish-red hues, like in brown chicken eggs. Together, they can produce a rainbow of colors and patterns. The color of eggs actually has a lot of functional significance. Not only can it be used for camouflage, but color can help form a protective sunscreen layer that deflects UV rays from the egg and helps prevent those rays from mutating the baby's genetic code. Also, pigments sometimes impart antibacterial properties that help keep bacteria out of the eggs. Color can also be useful in identifying eggs that belong to your own species. This can be important when you think about how often birds are sneaky, borrowing the careful parenting of one species by laying their eggs in another bird's nest. An interloper's egg won't look quite right, so it can be identified by a parent and kicked right out of the nest. Before we move into the dinosaur world, we need to talk just a tiny bit about the details of eggs. Did you know that there are microscopic pores in eggshell? When you crack open an egg at breakfast, you're probably not thinking about those minute details. But tiny little conduits would allow the embryonic animal inside of an egg to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with the outside world. The pores flow through a crystalline structure that allows eggshells of different animal groups to be relatively precisely identified. The density of pore spaces has something to tell us about whether the eggs may have been buried or laid on the surface. Eggs that are buried, like crocodile eggs, have more pores per egg because they need more conduits to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide in a buried nest. In contrast, eggs in open nests require fewer pores. We can use the relationship between egg porosity and open and closed nests in living animals to predict whether fossil animals with similar porosities were laying their eggs out in the open or burying them under vegetation, sediment, or even sitting on them to brood. Now, let's turn to dinosaurs and explore some of the things we know and don't know using what we've just learned about living animals to frame the conversation. What do we know about dinosaur soft parts, like oviducts, or external genitalia, like penises? Is there any way to tell a male from a female dinosaur? For the most part, we aren't sure, because the soft stuff of dinosaurs doesn't usually get preserved in the fossil record. In terms of external reproductive anatomy, it's tough to say what was going on in dinosaurs. Like their living archosaur relatives, dinosaurs had cloacas. This is like a one-stop shop for the exit of both the urogenital system and the digestive system. In fact, cloaca means sewer in Latin, for good reason. In some living crocodilians and birds, and many other living reptiles, including turtles, lizards, and snakes, the cloaca houses a protrusible penis that is only exposed during mating. Because only 3% of living birds have true penises, we can't say much that is definitive about the presence of such a feature in dinosaurs. That said, these diverse organs are very common among land-living animals, especially in those with unusual body shapes like turtles. Having a penis can sometimes ensure more precision when it comes to mating, making it more likely that a male is able to inseminate a female. It has been a little bit easier to make determinations about sex in female dinosaurs. We use two clues to help: medullary bone and the anatomical signatures of oviducts. Medullary bone is an interesting type of highly vascularized bone tissue that forms on the interior marrow spaces in bird bones when they're getting ready to shell their eggs. It essentially allows birds to mobilize bone mineral from their own bodies for use in the bones and eggs of their offspring. Medullary bone has been discovered in a variety of dinosaurs, indicating that these specimens are ovulating females. What about the hallmarks of oviducts? In a few cases, we find oblong eggs that appear to have been laid in pairs, 2 by 2. Perhaps this means that the egg layer had 2 functional oviducts like crocodiles, but shelled just 1 egg at a time in each, more like birds. An exceptionally preserved partial oviraptor skeleton found in China gave us a little confirmation of this idea. This fossil preserved 2 shelled eggs within the pelvis side by side. The paired eggs indicated 2 functional oviducts, with 1 egg produced at a time, just as suggested by some nests of eggs. It seems that, at least sometimes, dinosaurs utilize features that are exhibited in both of their living relatives to shell and lay their eggs. Speaking of eggs, we've found lots of dinosaur eggs the world over. North America, China, South Africa, Mongolia, you name it. Dinosaur eggs come in all shapes and sizes, just like living archosaur eggs do. When we combine what we can learn from shape, egg microstructure, porosity, and where they occur in time and space, we can characterize eggs into different ooze species. This is a kind of taxonomy that allows us to group similar eggshell styles together, even when we're not positive which dinosaur laid the eggs. Unless we have discovered eggshells in association with identifiable embryos or associated adults, it can be hard to link eggs to particular dinosaurs. So occasionally, we use the method of parataxonomy to develop a naming protocol for eggshells. With eggs, we call this eutaxonomy. When we are lucky enough to find embryonic dinosaurs preserved inside specific types of eggs, only then are we able to tie our particular ooze species to broad groups of dinosaurs. In other words, we can sometimes say that we know sauropods laid eggs with an egg microstructure characterized by a particular suite of features and a certain egg morphology. Then, the next time we find an egg without an embryo, but with these eggshell characteristics, we can reasonably hypothesize that egg might have also been laid by a sauropod. So eggshells are a really important part of the dinosaur fossil record. There are lots of ways that dinosaurs built their nests, and there are lots of different ways that we think dinosaurs may have brooded or cared for their nests. Some theropod nests take on a general morphology where the eggs are all arranged in a spiral shape. This means that the eggs were manipulated within the nest once they were laid, and might remind you of the nest tending of crocodiles. Perhaps these theropods were organizing their eggs to optimize incubation temperatures within their nests as well. The same thing occurs in the nests we have of Protoceratops, a little herbivorous ceratopsian from Mongolia. This means that some dinosaurs were definitely involved in tending nests of unhatched eggs. Rarely, we've even found dinosaurs sitting atop their eggs, just like some modern birds do. You'll remember the case of the early discoveries and subsequent misinterpretations of the theropod called oviraptor. The name oviraptor translates to egg thief because the first finds included these theropods near eggs that we assumed to be from an herbivorous dinosaur. This prompted the idea that oviraptor was stealing the eggs from the nest. As more and more associations of oviraptor and nests of eggs came to light, though, someone finally got brave enough to crack one of those eggs open to see what type of baby dinosaur might be inside. Guess what? It was oviraptor. Instead of stealing eggs to eat, these oviraptor parents were protecting their nests through brooding, very much like modern birds do. On the other end of the spectrum, it seems that other dinosaurs might not have been such great parents. One great example, the sauropods. We have several localities on Earth where we've found identifiable sauropod nests. Generally, sauropod eggs are round and seem to be laid, but they're not really organized. Instead, we see a big dump of disorganized eggs, essentially a pile of eggs. We imagine that sauropods would have used their legs to kick out a low hollow space, laid their eggs, sometimes as many as 50 per nest, and then wandered away. This makes pretty good sense when you consider the scale of sauropods. Their eggs would have been easily crushed by a simple misstep. In a few cases, we have evidence that some dinosaurs returned to nesting localities year after year, and that sometimes many different individuals may have laid their eggs in the same place at the same time. There's an amazing fossil locality nicknamed Alcomahuevo, a play on the Spanish word for eggs, where many sauropod nests were discovered that contained embryonic titanosaurs within eggs. The number of nests and their distribution in space points toward both some coloniality, with multiple individuals laying eggs at the same time, as well as a return to this nesting ground over time, with multiple sedimentary layers preserving nests containing eggs. The proximity of nests within a single horizon at Alcomahuevo seems to leave little space for one adult sauropod, let alone several adults, to move among them, which may point toward more limited nest tending in this group of dinosaurs. Instead, sauropods seem to have laid many eggs, hatched many babies, and were betting on the loss of many juveniles along the way. The fossil record for eggs and nests for duck-billed hadrosaurs is well known from here in North America. The famous dinosaur nesting site in Montana, nicknamed Egg Mountain, documents 3 notable finds: a colonial nesting strategy, site fidelity for the hadrosaur Maiasaura, whose name literally translates to good mother lizard, and a nesting site for a small theropod called Troodon. Colonial nesting means that more than one individual likely laid eggs in this area in a single season, while site fidelity means that these dinosaurs repeatedly returned to the same nesting ground over time. These sites provided some interesting data on the potential for post-hatching care in Maiasaura. There are many nests that preserve broken up eggshells and partial baby skeletons, ranging in size from very, very small hatchlings to slightly bigger toddler-sized animals. To determine whether these small hadrosaurs were nest-bound, paleontologist Jack Horner thin-sectioned their long bones and studied the preserved cartilaginous ends. He hypothesized that the large cartilage plugs at the ends of baby hadrosaur bones would have made it impossible for them to run around on their own. Their bones would have been too flimsy, kind of like the bones of altricial birds and baby humans. Jack suggested that this bone structure would have required baby Maiasaura to hang out within the nest, relying on its parents to bring food back until they were big enough to leave the nest and be independently mobile. This is pretty cool to imagine. Adult Maiasaura were about 30 feet long from head to tail, so not a small creature. Babies would have been only about a foot long or so at hatching. It's fun to think about Big Mama Maya tending to those tiny babies and keeping them safely within the nest. Just as the microscopic pores in the eggshells of today's crocs and birds can tell us a lot about nesting conditions, eggshell porosity in dinosaur eggs can tell us about whether their eggs were buried or exposed. It turns out that we have lots of data to shed light on this question for different kinds of egg types. We can see the preserved porosity in dinosaur fossils, just like those channels that exist in the eggs of living animals. This information tells us that while some dinosaurs left their eggs exposed on the surface, others buried their eggs. One of the really interesting discoveries is that some dinosaur eggshells preserve the two pigments that we see in all modern bird eggshells. Because of that, for a few rare dinosaur eggs, we can make pretty good guesses about the colors they might have been. The most exciting one belongs to an oviraptorid dinosaur. The eggs looked bluish when they were discovered, and it turns out that the primary pigment preserved in the microscopic structures of these eggshells is the same ones that makes modern eggs blue. From this information, we can hypothesize that these dinos laid blue-green eggs just like modern emus. The fact that these eggs are pigmented might have implications as well for the mode of incubation. If they were exposed to the surface most of the time, perhaps that blue-green color served as some sunscreen, just as it does in emus. I'd like to turn now to some of my own work on baby dinosaurs and share what the discoveries we've made tell us about the earliest lives of tiny sauropod babies. Sauropods take pretty much everything about dinosaurs to the extreme, and I've often thought that if we could just figure out some of the fundamental aspects of sauropod biology, it might help unlock the more general patterns of dinosaur biology writ large. One of the missing parts of the sauropod fossil record has been their babies. We have lots of giant sauropods and even juvenile sauropods who are the size of giraffes or elephants. But the lack of a baby sauropod fossil record led some scientists to propose that perhaps sauropods were even weirder than we realized. Maybe, unlike all other dinosaurs, they gave live birth to 500-pound newborns. That would certainly help explain why we don't usually find small sauropods. The discoveries of sauropod embryos at places like Alcomuevo put to rest the idea that live birth was a specialization of sauropods, but it only made the question about their babies more pressing. If sauropods were laying nests with 50 softball-sized eggs, we should expect high rates of mortality in those babies. That means lots of dead little things that might get swept into the fossil record. We know it can be hard to preserve small, delicate things, but does that explain the lack of dead baby sauropods? With no record of baby sauropods to build from, we couldn't answer any questions about the earliest life history for the biggest of all dinosaurs. What we needed were fossils. Fast forward to a museum collection full of fossils that we'd found over 11 different field seasons in Madagascar. I was there looking through the collection in search of bits and pieces of turtle and crocodile bones that I could use in a study of bone histology. My favorite place to dig around is in the miscellaneous drawers of unidentified fossil material that assembles over time in museum collections. As plaster jackets get prepared, there are inevitably weird little fragments of bone that, at the time, fossil preparators or curators aren't sure of. They gather them in one place where they can await the practiced eye of an expert who's seen something just like that weird little bony bit in another collection they've studied and put them where they belong within the broader assemblage. The crocs and turtles in Madagascar are pretty strange, so a lot of their isolated and fragmentary bones were in these unknown cabinets. As I browsed through the boxes and bins of fossils, I began to notice a bunch of tiny bones that looked pretty much identical to the bones of Herpetosaurus, just miniaturized versions. I was excited about this and pulled all those bones out of those drawers one by one. By the end of the afternoon, I'd compiled a small collection of little sauropod bones, tail bones, toe bones, hip bones, vertebrae, and limb bones, all from the same locality and collected in the same summer. No elements were duplicated, and by this, I mean that there weren't two left femora, but some elements were paired. So in a few cases, I had a perfectly matched set of right and left bones, as was the case for the humerus and fibula. It turned out that a casual search through that unknown cabinet led to the discovery of the tiniest hatched baby sauropod ever discovered. Based on comparison with other fossils in the collection, we could tell this baby was less than 10% the size of the biggest known Herpetosaurus. Even more interesting, each of these little bones looked pretty much the same as the adult bones in our collection. The proportions of the femur were retained from infant through to juvenile, subadult, and adult sizes. Given these proportional similarities, we were able to calculate the scaling relationships between elements to estimate body size, including mass, in this tiny titanosaur. It would have stood just knee-high, about 35 centimeters at the hip or shoulder, and would have weighed less than 50 pounds when it died. Okay, we finally had a baby sauropod. Super cute. Artist reconstructions can give you a better idea. Check out this image of a cute little baby Rapatosaurus with a bunch of other neonatal animals. Of course, it's great when you find something cool like this, but there are so many other downstream questions that continue to arise as you think more and more. What were the growth rates for sauropod babies? Did they exhibit the same fast growth that older adults record? Was there any way to tell anything about the size of hatchlings? We know that this baby was out and about doing its thing. So could we back calculate to even smaller growth stages, maybe closer to the moment of hatching? And finally, could these baby bones tell us anything about whether Rapatosaurus was a good parent? First, how fast did baby Rapatosaurus grow? Turns out that its bone tissue records really fast growth. These baby bones were once packed with blood vessels and cells that helped fuel the rapid growth of Rapatosaurus right out of the egg. All of the bones document that this baby was less than 3 months old by the time it died. This means that it had gone from hatching to 50 pounds in a pretty short interval of time. This makes good sense when we see the similar pattern of fast growth in much bigger sauropods, who were collectively among the fastest growing dinosaurs ever. We also spotted a strange pattern in each of the bones. Deep inside the bone cortex, there seemed to be a little ring around the circumference of each bone. When we zoomed in, we realized that this was a zone of relatively low vascularity that indicated a pause or a serious slowdown in growth. This seemed a little weird when we considered how tiny these babies still were. Usually you think about babies just packing on the pound, going gangbusters to get bigger. We turned to the published literature from living animals to help us figure out what this growth slowdown so early in life meant. It turns out we shouldn't have been surprised at all. In pretty much every animal, the moment of birth or hatching is traumatic and super tiring. So it's normal for newborn or newly hatched babies to pause their growth to recuperate from that stress for a short interval before turning on their regular growth rate. During that interval, babies that have powered their way out of an egg lay around, absorbing their yolk sac and recovering from the hard work of being born. We call these signals that these pauses create within bones hatching lines, birth lines, or neonatal lines. We'd identified hatching lines within these baby sauropod bones. This means that we could predict hatchling size using pretty simple math. At hatching, Rapatosaurus would have only been about 6 inches tall and weighed just 5 itty-bitty pounds. That means that Rapatosaurus was about the size of a chihuahua at hatching, and just a couple months later, it was the size of a golden retriever. What about parental care? When we took a close look at the preserved cartilage at the ends of our baby bones, we noticed really thin cartilage layers that were more like those of precocial birds than the thick, squishy cartilaginous ends of bones in altricial birds. We also looked for signatures of bone remodeling, which really begins once baby animals start loading their bones to walk around. We found the characteristic lifesaver-shaped structures that indicated Rapatosaurus babies were already using their bones enough to have prompted some serious remodeling. Together, these two signatures seem to indicate a fairly precocial lifestyle. It seems that baby Rapatosaurus hatched out of the egg and were pretty much ready to go, foraging on their own and evading predators with the best of them from the start. One of the coolest things that this research helped me realize was just how different newborn sauropods were from adults. Baby bodies were already built for the future loads they'd have to carry as adults, which is why their limbs were proportionally identical. Being overbuilt for a small body size has lots of implications for movement and locomotion. We usually imagine sauropods as majestic, elephant-like creatures moving almost in slow motion across Mesozoic ecosystems. But babies, just like small elephants, they would have been capable of running, jumping, rolling around, and standing up on their hind legs. I picture them with floppy skin, ready to get filled in with that developing body, rearing up to pluck some tasty vegetation out of the nearby brush. They likely were camouflaged like living baby animals are, with muted colors, stripes, and spots that would help them blend into the world around them. They ate different food than their adult counterparts, and in some ways, they were like totally different animals. These discoveries remind us that every dinosaur, no matter how big they are destined to become, starts out in the world as a tiny, vulnerable baby, hatching out of a hard-shelled egg into a wild world. Once out, they either struggled to make their way, grow up, and find a mate to start the cycle of life over again, or they became a quick snack for lurking theropods and cunning crocodilians. No one said that life was easy, then or now.